Hey, it's Steve Van Tassel here for Dynasty Owner, and we are in week 14. This is the week 14 preview video. It goes along with the article that I've written that's on dynastyowner.com. So go check the article out for a little more information than what you're going to hear here in the video. And please make sure to like the video. Appreciate you hitting the like button on it. And we are going to talk about our week 14 preview, which is titled Freeze. And the reason why it's freeze is not to pause or anything like that, to stop. It's about the trade freeze, basically, that we have in Dynasty Owner starting at the end once week 14 starts, which runs all the way through the end of the Dynasty Owner playoffs. We used to have a free agent auction freeze, and actually, I kind of like that. I'm one of the few people, I'm in the minority there, that was gotten rid of at the end of last season. Dynasty owners kind of voted on it, and it was decided that people didn't really like the free agent auction freeze, so that's no longer. Personally, I liked it. I thought it was I don't like the idea of being able to pick up a player and use them in the playoffs when you haven't had him on your roster all season. I don't know. It just seems a little strange to me. I've never liked it. I've had it in my personal redraft league for a long time, and I just don't like it. So, but without further ado, let's talk a little bit more about this. We are talking about the freeze here that we have on Dynasty Owner, and we've got it going here. And so the trade freeze, and here's the description of the trade freeze from the Dynasty Owner Constitution, and it's a trade freeze. There's a deadline from the start of week 14 through the end of week 17, championship matchups. So basically, trades need to be processed by the start of week 14. So if you have a trade involving Steelers or Vikings, they've already been frozen. For everybody else, all those trades have to be cleared by 1 o'clock on Sunday. And that means that they really need to be accepted by about noon on Saturday. So if you're watching this early Saturday morning and you've got a trade idea there, get it going, get it through, get it accepted, and hopefully it'll help you in your quest on the playoffs. So without further ado, let's talk. Well, first, we'll just talk about the undefeated Dynasty Owner teams that we have. These teams probably don't need to pick anybody up or trade right now because they're undefeated. They're doing great. We're down to 2. We had 3 last week, but the Hip Hop Eponymous lost. And so now we've only got 2 undefeated Dynasty Owner teams. We've got Dynasty Trade School, Mad Minshew, in League 27458. They're in 3rd place in the chase for the ring. And we've got the Trade's Finest, which is in League 74733. They're in 15th place in the chase for the ring. But more importantly, both of them are undefeated. So we'll see if they can survive week 14 in the playoffs. Check back here next week and see if they're still undefeated. So without further ado, we're going to talk about guys who should be in your starting lineup this week. And as always, we start with the recap of week 13, the prior week. Last week, I suggested that you should have the following 4 players in your Dynasty Owner starting lineup. And they were Taylor Heineke of the Washington football team, Boston Scott of the Philadelphia Eagles, Dan Jefferson from the Rams, and Brevin Jordan from the Texans. And it was a little bit of a mixed bag. The Van Jefferson recommendation was good. He had 16.1 Dynasty Owner fantasy points. He was a top 24 wide receiver for the week. So that recommendation was good. Whereas Heineke, he had 19.8 Dynasty Owner fantasy points. He was outside the top 12 quarterbacks, so that was just okay. And then we had the 2 bad ones, which were Brevin Jordan, who only had 2.7 points for the Texans, and Boston Scott, who was active. So he could have played, but he didn't end up playing, and he drew the dreaded Blutarski 0.0 Dynasty Owner fantasy points. So those 2 recommendations were bad. We had same recommendations last week, same record last week. So see if we can do better with week 14, our starting recommendations. And the first one here is Taysom Hill from the New Orleans Saints. And I mean, Hill wasn't bad fantasy-wise last week. He had 25.3 Dynasty owner fantasy points. I mean, he had a bad week as an NFL quarterback because he threw 4 interceptions and his team lost and they only scored 17 points. But as a fantasy quarterback, he was okay. And this week, he gets to go up against the New York Jets, whose defense is pretty much just dreadful. They are last in the league in points allowed. They're allowing almost 31 points a game. They're allowing almost 400 yards of total offense per game. And I think that Taysom Hill is going to provide top 12 quarterback value this week. So I'd have him in your starting lineup if you possibly can. The next player is Michael Hastie, running back of the San Francisco 49ers. And I mean, he's basically the one guy left. I think Jeffrey Wilson probably is going to play this week. But at the end of last week, Hastie was the only running back left for the 49ers. And even if Wilson does play, Hastie should be the backup and play on third downs. And that's good because they're playing the Bengals this week, and the Bengals defense allows a lot of receptions to running backs. They have allowed 88, which is the most in the NFL. It's like a little over 7 per game. So if Hastie can get a good share of those, he'll provide enough dynasty and fantasy points to be worth having in your starting lineup. Third, we're going to pair Taysom Hill with one of his wide receivers, and that wide receiver is Traequan Smith. And the reason for Smith, as opposed to some of the other Saints wide receivers, who are all outside the top 24 wide receivers, is that last week we had our value player of the week, who was Deontay Harris, but he's suspended this week, so he's out. And Marquez Callaway, he hasn't played much with Hill at quarterback. So I went with Traequan Smith because he did pretty good last year. Even with Michael Thomas in the lineup, Traequan Smith averaged about 6.3 dynasty owner fantasy points per week when Hill is the starting quarterback, and I think he'll do better this week. So I think you should start him. Remember, they're playing the Jets, who have a dreadful defense as well. That'll help. And finally, the tight end you should be starting this week is Austin Hooper. And Hooper is pretty much the only tight end left on the Cleveland roster. 2 weeks ago, Cleveland tight ends had 6 receptions for 83 receiving yards and a touchdown, which is 20.5 dynasty owner fantasy points. But the wide receivers who got those points, David Njoku and Harrison Bryant, they're both out. Bryant has an ankle injury. Njoku is on the COVID list. And so Hooper's pretty much the only tight end left for the Browns. They do have a rookie, Miller Forrestall, but he has not yet to play this season, so I wouldn't expect him to do a lot. But I would expect Hooper to do a lot, and I think he'll do about average for the Cleveland tight ends, which has generally been about 6 receptions for 73 yards this year. That'll be plenty good enough to get him in your starting lineup. So those are the people I recommend who probably won't, who usually would be outside the top 20 top players to having your starting lineup this week. Now we're going to talk about guys who should be on your bench or practice squad this week. And these are guys who are inside the top 12 quarterbacks, 24 running backs, 24 wide receivers. But I don't think they're going to have a good week this week. And so you should put them on your bench. And last week's recap, I recommended these 4 players. I had Josh Allen, Saquon Barkley, Kendrick Bourne, and TJ Hawkinson. And the results were 50-50. The guys who played on Monday night in that horrible wind, Allen and Bourne, both were good recommendations. Allen had 14.1 dynasty owner fantasy points. He was outside the top 20 quarterbacks for the week. And Kendrick Bourne had no receptions, 1 rush for 3 yards. And so he should have been nowhere near your starting lineup or even your bench, honestly. In contrast, the Barkley recommendation was bad. He had 13.4 points. He was a low-end running back 2 for the week. And TJ Hawkinson had 14.9 dynasty owner fantasy points, which put him easily in the top 12. So that recommendation was also bad. Hopefully we can do better. 2 out of 2 good, 2 bad isn't terrible. But let's try to improve on it in week 14. And then with that, our bet recommendations for week 14 start with Lamar Jackson. And 2 weeks ago, the Browns played the Ravens, and the Browns defense held Jackson to 9 Dynasty owner fantasy points. They intercepted him 4 times. Now, I'm not expecting the same performance, but it is 2 weeks later. Cleveland hasn't played anybody else, so they've had plenty of time to prepare. And Jackson hasn't been great this year. He had that one amazing game where he had 63.3 Dynasty owner fantasy points. But other than that, he's been fairly average. He's averaging 23.5 points per game, which if he had that average for the whole year, that would put him outside the top 12. So I don't expect him to do that well. I think he'll do a little bit worse than that. He's been turning the ball over a lot this season, a lot more than he has in past seasons. And so I would have him on my bench this week. The next player is James Robinson. And yes, he should have been on your bench last week after you only had 1.5 Dynasty on fantasy points. And this is just a trust issue with Urban Meyer. At the beginning of the year, he didn't play Robinson that much. Then all of a sudden he started playing him a lot. He gave him like 19 or more touches for 4 consecutive weeks. Then Jacksonville went on bye, and then Robinson got hurt, and now he's back to not using Robinson as much. Last week was kind of an abomination where he got out-touched by Carlos Hyde. I'm not sure if that'll happen again this week, but I just don't think he's going to get enough to be Dynasty owner starting lineup relevant. So I don't trust Urban Meyer's usage of James Robinson, even despite what he says about he knows he should get him in the lineup. I don't trust it. I wouldn't have him in my lineup this week. The third guy I don't think you should have in your lineup this week is Brandon Cooks. And you feel bad for Brandon Cooks. He's had poor quarterback play from Tyrod Taylor and Davis Mills all season. And even with that, he's still a top 24 wide receiver right now. The problem is that they're struggling even more than usual the last couple of weeks. The Texans have scored 36 points over the last 3 weeks since their bye. Davis Mills is going to be the quarterback this week. He's throwing for over 200 yards only half of the time that he started. And it's going to be tough for Cooks to get open and get points against the Seattle defense, who's actually done pretty good. They've allowed only 7 receiving touchdowns to wide receivers, which is one of the lowest in the league. And they haven't allowed any since their week 9 bye. I mean, they've allowed a lot to tight ends and 4 to tight ends and 1 to a running back, but none to wide receivers. So if Cooks can't get in the end zone, he's not going to produce enough points to be worth putting in your starting lineup. And I think that's what's going to happen this week. And finally, the last player is your tight end. It's Zach Ertz. And this was a tough one because a lot of the top tight ends aren't playing right now. 3 out of the 4 teams on bye this week have a top 12 tight end. Mike Gesicki from the Dolphins, Hunter Henry from the Patriots, and Dallas Goedert from the Eagles. TJ Hawkinson is likely out. Darren Waller is definitely out. So we're going to go with Ertz here. And it's just because he hasn't had a lot of time with the Arizona Cardinals. He hasn't had a lot of time with Kyler Murray. He hasn't played great with Murray. When Murray's been there, he's actually played better with Colt McCoy in the starting lineup as the quarterback for Arizona. And so I would just have lower expectations for Ertz this week against the Rams, and I would not have him in my starting lineup. And finally, we've got our final regular season Week 14 matchup of the week. And this one, I wanted to find teams I basically wanted to find a matchup to profile where if the team won, they're in the playoffs, and if they lost, they're out of the playoffs. And it took a while to find something because there was a lot of teams where if they got in, they're in the playoffs, but they weren't playing another team. They were playing either a team higher than them or lower. And I just didn't find anything until I came across this matchup in League 6184834. And it's Doobie's Misfits against Seaman's Crew. And as you can see, I took this after the Thursday game. Seaman's Crew has a lead of 40.7 to 0, as they have already had 2 players play for them. They had Najee Harris and Deontay Johnson on Thursday night, and they scored a little bit above what they were predicted, but it still leaves Seaman's Crew at a deficit against Doobie's Misfits. And it's mostly because Seaman's Crew has a couple of players who hopefully won't be in their starting lineup right now. They have Mike Williams, who's likely to be out. They have Tevin Coleman, who's definitely out. And so I just think that they need to take advantage of the free agent auction in the week before the freeze, pick up a couple of players or make some changes to their lineup. And they should have a good chance against Doobie's Misfits. Whoever wins this game will be either the 5 or the 6 seed in this league. And going up against a team to be determined. There's a few teams. There's actually a logjam at the top of the standings in this league. There's a 10-3 team, which is Faulty Niners. There's 3 9-4 teams: Burrows Before Hose, Fitzmagic, and the Wester Way 49ers. So any of those teams could be the team that the winner of this matchup faces in the first round of the playoffs. But it's going to be one of these two teams. If they lose, they have very, very little chance of making the playoffs. So it's a win in your in type of situation for these two teams. So that's it. That's the preview. Thank you for watching, listening to the video. As I said, please hit the like button. And after this week, the regular season is going to be over for Dynasty Owner. It's on to the playoffs. Or, unfortunately, if you've not done so well, you've got the losers bracket tournament. So good luck. Remember about the freeze for trades. There's no free agent auction freeze anymore. Remember to set your lineup, please. It's very important. I know you should be doing it every week, but especially for weeks when playoffs are coming into focus, and it might matter. Your team having its lineup set might make the difference between a team getting in and not getting in. So it's very important to do that. So thanks for watching. Thanks for reading the article. Check out the article on Dynasty Owner for a little more information. Make sure you check out all the other articles that we've got coming. On Monday, we've got Jay Pounds with his Monday Night Football matchup preview. And Tuesday, Jay's back with his free agent auction targets, which will continue into the playoffs this year because, as I said, there's no freeze. Matt the Jerk is going to be back on Wednesday with an article and a video, and then he'll be here again on Thursday. He'll have an article previewing the Thursday night football game, which is going to be the first game of the Dynasty Owner playoffs. So that'll be very exciting. Don't forget about the live stream on Wednesdays with me, Tim, and Dr. Cousin Justin, talking about a lot of injury updates with Dr. Cousin Justin. And thanks a lot. Thanks for being a Dynasty Owner. Thanks for playing in the 2021 regular season. Hopefully you're making the playoffs. You'll be checking out all these articles and videos in the coming weeks. And good luck. Thanks a lot. Have a great day.